Layers is one of the foundational features in Photoshop that you're going to use on a very regular basis. Think of it as building blocks for Photoshop, because the layers are exactly that. They are individual layers that each layer is different or performs a specific function, and we're going to look at those functions here in a little bit. But you can see with the current document that we have open on the screen, the only layer that exists is the background layer, and the background layer currently is the foundational layer. It may be a solid color, it may be a photograph or a graphic design or element or whatever, but it's the foundational layer. You cannot move this particular layer. It's locked into place. So if I tried to move it, nothing would happen because the layer is locked and you can't unlock it. Now, you can make edit changes to it, and we've explored that in previous videos. You can change colors, add colors, all of that. But you just can't use this layer to affect other layers unless you make a copy of it, because it's at the bottom. It's the bottom layer, also known as the background. Now, in the layer palette here that you see on the right, you'll notice that there's a number of tools and options that we have available to us. And as we go through this section, we're going to explore pretty much all of these. But the one that I want to highlight right now is the second tool in from the right. The first one is the trash can, which is basically it's delete, for lack of a better way of saying it. The next one is the create tool. So you can create a new layer, and you can use this in a number of ways. One is to just simply click it and it will create a new layer. The other way to use it is if you have an existing layer that you want to make a copy of. Say you have a photograph of something on a layer and you want to make a copy of it, you can click on that layer and drag it down on top of the create a new layer button, and it'll make a duplication of that layer. Okay, and so we'll get into that more by example as we move through this demo. But a couple other things that I want to point out about layers themselves is that once you start creating a new layer, you have a lot of different things that you can do with this layer. I mean, it literally can be anything from a photograph to a graphic design. It's a whole new sheet of paper, so to speak, that you can paint on, draw on, type on, do whatever you want with. One of the things that I find extremely important when working with layers, just to keep your sanity, is to really be deliberate about naming structure. By default, they're going to be called layer 1, layer 2, so on and so forth, or copy of layer, whatever you've copied. An easy way to change that is to simply double click on the name and name it whatever, whatever the function of it is. Let's say we had a rose on this layer, so I could just type in rose, okay, and then it's done. You also notice that if I right mouse click, we have other controls. We can control the size of the thumbnail. We can even assign color codes to certain layers if we want to make it easy to identify certain parts of a larger project that we're working on. Say that there's certain elements that are forming a very detailed piece in an overall design. We could assign all of those to, say, the color blue. And from that point on, every time we assign the color blue to a layer related to that particular object, at a quick glance, we can see, oh yeah, that's related to that section. And so it makes it very easy for us to keep track. And that's if we right mouse click over top of the image itself. If I right mouse click further out into the layer, I'm still in the same layer, but I'm right mouse clicking here, you notice that we get a different set of options. Blending options, which we're going to get into in detail later on. Copy CSS, which is something that you're really not going to use much. It's web-based related, and we're not going to get into that in this training. Duplicate layer. So this is another way of duplicating in addition to just dragging it down onto the create a new layer. We can delete it from here, group from layers, which we're going to look at here very shortly, and convert to smart object, which we're going to look at a little bit later on. Create a clipping mask, we're not going to get into right now. Merge options, we're going to get into later. And some of these others will become active as we add objects to our layers. And so as we go along, I'll explain what some of these other functions are as we get into them. You'll also notice in the layer palette, you have this section here that says normal. This is our blending mode for the layer. It basically determines how our layer interacts with what's underneath it. Okay, and so normal is the default, but you notice that we also have a lot of other options as well, and we've seen these before. We've seen these interaction blending modes before with regard to our brushes and different other tools that are available to us. You also have control over the opacity, so you can control how much or how little the opacity is of this layer, which of course also affects how it's blending into below. And also fill, depending on the type of object or color or whatever that you're adding here as well. Another thing that you can do is lock the layer, and I'm going to show you some specific examples. We looked at this in one of the previous videos. This is if you have a certain object on a layer and you don't want it to be affected by, like if you're filling a color or something like that and you don't want any other part of the object to be affected, you can just simply lock the layer. And we have these other options as well that are available to you, from just locking the image pixels. If you have like part of the layer as a photograph, you can lock the image pixels. You can also lock the position. So if I choose lock, what that means is that if I decided that I wanted to, say, fill this box with a color, it would only fill this box. It would replace the photograph with a color, but it would only fill wherever the box is. Okay. If I choose to lock the image pixels, that means that the only pixels that are affected with any kind of edit changes or anything like that that I want to make on this layer are the pixels in the image itself. Okay. If I lock the position, you notice that I can't move it, and that can come in handy sometimes. And the last option that we have is to lock everything, to basically just lock it down. You're done working on that particular layer. You want to make sure that it isn't affected in any way, shape, or form by accident or otherwise, and you can just lock it down, which is basically the same setting as you find here in the background. Okay? And then, of course, we also have other options as well. We have filter for pixel layers. We can create adjustment layers. We're going to look at that later. Type, shape layers, smart objects, and all of that. So a lot of different options that we have available to us in working with layers. And as we dig into the layers training, we're going to go through many of these options step by step.